Hello there and welcome to another mixed martial arts conversation for Sky Sports, reacting to Bellator 249 from Connecticut, which saw Cris Cyborg defend her featherweight title with the first submission of her career against Arlene Blencowe of Australia. Very pleased to say, MMA journalist, writes for The Telegraph, amongst others. Gareth A. Davis joins us this morning after covering this through the night. Gareth, how much did you enjoy last night and Cris Cyborg making history, first submission victory?
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable, really, isn't it? But then again, she has been that kind of, if I can describe her like a Mike Tyson of women's mixed martial arts, where she's been a wrecking ball fighter for so many years. And really, her one major high-profile defeat to Amanda Nunes in the UFC being the one moment where she went toe-to-toe with the other hardest hitter we've seen in women's MMA. Yeah, I mean, she is just incredible. She gets the submission against a former world boxing champion in Arlene Blencowe and flattens her out like a giant anaconda and gets the choke. I mean, she is remarkable. She dominated that fight from the very start to the very finish. And it was obvious that Arlene had a game plan of trying to stay in the center of the cage. But once Cyborg imposed herself, she got her, she marshaled Blencowe to where she wanted her to be, and there was no way back. Incredible. Incredible.
How much the secret of the victory was her variety, her sort of multitude of weapons seemed to be the fact that Blencowe just didn't know what was coming next in terms of an attack.
Well, you look at the sequence of what she did. The lower leg kicks, first of all, to take the front foot balance away from Blencowe, who was clearly had the game plan of trying to take the center of the cage to not be dominated. But you could see as soon as the lower leg kicks were arriving, it forced Blencowe back. Blencowe came on then and tried to go into exchanges with Cyborg. She countered brilliantly, Cris Cyborg. And then you could see what happens to the brain is that people back off. It backed her towards the cage. She got physical control. She got ground game working. You know, this is a former world boxing champion who had no recourse in this fight. And it was utter dominance. It looked like a febrile attempt at a world title. But you talked to Arlene, as we did before the event. She was totally confident, believed that she could go in there and in the exchanges, get Cyborg's respect early. But the truth is, there is something special with Cris Cyborg. And at 35, she looks like she's getting better when she has to implement a game plan.
How much of that is down to enthusiasm? Because we spoke to her last week and she seems to be relishing doing more boxing training, doing more jiu-jitsu, wrestling. She sees them very much as separate disciplines, but puts them together, but seems to be making those marginal gains in all areas.
I think it's an overall picture thing, Ed. I think what it is, 10 years ago, I did an interview with her myself this week for Telegraph Women's Sport, in which she was talking about body image. And we know that Cris gets a lot of attention because of the way she looks. She's a beautiful person, very softly spoken when she doesn't fight. And I think the Cyborg image kind of plays into that to the wider public that don't know her. But she does this work with charities, with African children that she's very passionate about. She's a very, very caring individual. And I think a lot of that has been lost for years and years until the last couple of years, when I think her enthusiasm that you talk about is part of the major growth in women's mixed martial arts in the last 3-4 years, since Ronda Rousey came on the scene and that group of women as well. So that's helped Cris to become a figure who's more celebrated. Look, she's got massive wins over Shayna Baszler, who's a WWE superstar now. She fought Gina Carano 14-15 years ago. That fight, by the way, was put on by Scott Coker. And Gina Carano is a Hollywood star now. So, in action movies. So Cris never really got the recognition that she deserved through her 20s. She told me that people used to look at her like a freak, look at her weird when she was in her 20s, yeah? Even her mum told her, by the way, and I've met her mum. I've had a beer with her in the early morning, in the mid-morning in a bar. Even her mum told her that when she first started fighting, she was going to end up homeless on the street because she didn't get it. She is celebrating the overall picture. I think we'll see her around for 3 or 4 more years, because this is a time, as we know in sport, you and I cover all sports and look at all sports, when women's sport is being pushed upwards and celebrating. And I think that's where all her enthusiasm comes from. She wants to get better. She wants to be a part of it. And she wants to create a clear legacy for this very long and very decorated career.
Yeah, it's very impressive, the mastery as well. Now, post-fight, it was interesting because pre-fight, we spoke to Cris Cyborg and probably ignited a debate that she then wanted to dampen, because she was saying she didn't want to talk about boxing anymore, but she did speak to us about Katie Taylor being an option. What are your thoughts about the feasibility and practicality of that? Scott Coker hinted there's been, well, he actually conceded there's been conversations with Eddie Hearn, Katie's boxing promoter, but then sort of threw out the slight caveat of an MMA rematch in a double header. What about that? Does that sort of almost rule it out if that's the condition?
Oh, I think it does rule it out. I mean, there's no way. Look, you look at the skills of Cyborg in terms of her stand-up and her power. She's a slightly bigger woman than Katie as well. So Katie would be giving away a little bit. But I think a boxing match is viable. I don't think an MMA match is. But it's big if it happens. I hope it's not a boxing match against Holly Holm or a boxing match against Amanda Nunes. I'd really like to see it against someone with a massive following. Let's go to Croke Park. Let's go to Ireland. Let's have that one-off. It's like 3 events a year is allowed outside sports events, aren't they, at Croke Park? Let's get that there. Let's get 70,000 crazy Irish there supporting Katie Taylor in that fight against Cyborg. It's just a boxing match because she's so heavy-handed. It would be like a bull against a matador in a boxing match. I think it's. I mean, I've spoken to Eddie about it. I've spoken to Scott about it. I've spoken to Katie about it. I've spoken to her manager about it. I've asked Cyborg about it. I think it's one of those things I spotted years ago. I don't want to say I helped make the fight, although I did. McGregor against Mayweather, I helped happen years ago. I remember suggesting it in interviews to McGregor over and over again at the NEC in Birmingham when I was with Mayweather, really pushing it because you could see it working in marketing terms. I could see this working in marketing terms, but only in a boxing match. I got goosebumps thinking about this fight because I think it would be enormous. I think it would be the biggest women's fight we've ever seen.
On the subject of biggest, it was fascinating because we put a piece together with a few experts giving insight. Tony Bellew, who's an MMA fan, Big John McCarthy, of course, at the Bellator, and Heather Hardy, who's crossed over from boxing to MMA. But one of the things that we zeroed in on in a piece that people can look up on Sky Sports was the weight issue that you allude to there and the size issue. Katie Taylor has won a world title at 140, but says that's her walking around weight. Whereas Cris Cyborg tells us that between fights, she gets up to 175 and would fight Katie Taylor at 147, which is welterweight. Do you think there's going to have to be a concession, some sort of catch weight that they're going to have to agree on that's outside of normal MMA or boxing weight?
Yeah, I mean, it is the big issue with the fight, deciding the weight. I think Cyborg might have to cut to 140. She might have to really, or 142. They've got to make some kind of penalty. You know, obviously she fights at 145, and we know she can make that weight. I think they've got to make her make 142 and give her an upper limit as well, which doesn't happen in MMA, does it? So I think she's got to have an upper limit of what she weighs on the morning of the fight as well, because otherwise it will be too big a discrepancy. But what you do have with Katie Taylor is someone who has shown in those 2 fights with, her name escapes me right now, the Belgian policewoman.
Delphine Persoon.
Delphine Persoon, thank you very much. In those 2 fights, we've seen her dexterity at times and her footwork, and that's what we're looking for in this fight. You know, she'll go toe-to-toe at some points. We know that she will not want to get trapped in a corner with Cris Cyborg because it's just going to be horrendous for her because the hands are going to go. Katie's got faster hand speed, I believe, than Cyborg as well. The weight thing, as I say, what they've got to do is define the weight and define the upper weight for the contest as well. But for me, it's the biggest matchup outside those in women's fight sports, unless you put Nunes and Cyborg back together independently for the women's world title, I think this would even be bigger because it's two codes coming together. But
So
yeah.
preferable to a Clarissa Shields match or something like that for Cyborg in terms of sizes being maybe more, because it's not quite got the public attention, has it? Is that the issue?
I don't think Clarissa Shields is as big a figure as Katie Taylor. I don't think you get 70,000 in a stadium. You could in Ireland. You could easily fill out big stadia, some big stadia for Katie Taylor and Cyborg. I'm not sure whether Shields, brilliant fight that is as well, a matchup, and that's been spoken about. Brilliant fight that is between the two.
Yeah, we look forward to that potentially being made, and whatever happens between Scott Coker and Eddie Hearn, we'll run that on Sky Sports as soon as we get it. We've got highlights of the fight up there, so definitely check out Cyborg. But the co-main event, we're very unfortunate that Patricky Freire against Jaleel Willis didn't make because of an imbalance to Patricky, dizzy before the fight. How concerning is that for him, or is it a one-off flu? They've said a flu-like condition.
Look. We talk with a relish about the educated brutality, the beautiful brutality in front of us. The bottom line, Ed, as we all know, and we're all reminded of at times, is it's safety first. So I don't think it's worrying. I think it'd have been worrying if he'd gone in there with feeling dizzy or feeling unwell or feeling symptoms. There's double safety measures at the moment. I mean, I think we spoke about that when I was in Italy. If people are not well, the Paul Daly case, in Italy, where he's pulled from the fight. If people aren't well, you pull them from the fight. If people have COVID-like symptoms, you pull them from the fight. It's safety first. It's got to be in our fight sports, boxing and MMA, because we don't want fatalities in the sport. We want to minimize the risks in what is an inherently dangerous sport anyway. So shame we didn't get to see it, but we'll come again.
Yeah, sort of, and he may fight for a title vacated by his brother. How do you see the permutations there? That's an interesting one.
Well, the funny thing about those two is the very first interview I did with them years ago was all about how many fights those two had growing up, and obviously they'll never fight each other professionally, but they were they're still, well, I think they're less so sparring partners at this elite level today. But yeah, he's going to have to wait for his brother to vacate the lightweight title or be beaten. That's the easy segue into it. But he is a viable contender at 155 as well. He's a very dangerous fighter, heavy-handed, and he's getting better as his brother has over the years.
Yeah, he certainly is. We'll wait to see what Patricky Freire comes back and wish him all the best. Just a reminder, I suppose, that in these times of COVID, there are other illnesses and colds out there, which we're all realising at the moment, the seasonal flus and so on and so forth. Talk about Ricky Bandejas. He sort of exploded onto the scene in Bellator, but now I believe lost 3-1-2 since that win over James Gallagher. How do you see him after the defeat last night to Leandro Higo?
Well, it was a brilliant performance by Leandro Higo. Obviously, he's part of the Pitbull team as well, the Freire brother team, trains in the same group. It was a brilliant performance by Higo. I think he's a really dangerous fighter at bantamweight. I think he's a viable challenger down the line for the champion Juan Archuleta, but he failed to make weight. That was the big issue about this fight. But I thought Bandejas is a developing fighter. And I think Higo is brilliant on the ground. He's overstrengthed. That's not a word. He's incredibly strong for a 135-pound fighter and a much bigger guy than you think. I think on the commentary last night, we heard Josh Thompson saying he's rolled with him. Josh Thompson was the #1 lightweight in the world at one point, wins over people like Nate Diaz, of course. And I think what Higo showed, if Higo can make weight, I think he genuinely is a title challenger in the division. And you could see him being a major matchup for the likes of Sergio Pettis, for James Gallagher, and all these other guys that have ambitions, vaulting ambition in that 135-pound bantamweight division. Good victory for Higo, though. I thought he dominated the stand-up and the groundwork.
And where does Bandejas go? Does he need to reset, work on different aspects of his game?
Yeah, I mean, I know Ricky a little bit. We follow each other on social media. We've had some fantastic interviews over the last few years. I think he's I think sometimes he doesn't. Last night he wasn't really in the fight for me. He was overwhelmed last night. But I do think he's got great capabilities in the stand-up. He's a very dangerous striker. He's got to work more on his ground game. He's a young fighter.
Yeah, he certainly is. We wish him all the best in his recovery and how he responds to it. Quickly before you go, Gareth, just round up where you feel MMA is at the moment. You've been out for Bellator in Milan and Paris as well. It feels like of all the sports during the pandemic, that perhaps the lack of crowds isn't viscerally affecting it as much as other sports. Do you feel that they're going strong at the moment in difficult circumstances for everyone?
Yeah, well, it's so made for TV, when fighters come in and deliver, and we've seen a lot of fighters come in and give their all. A lot of mixed martial artists give their all. It's ready-made TV, brilliant TV content. I think we have seen, the two major organizations in the world, the UFC and Bellator, have really put on a ton of major events. In Europe, I spoke to Scott Coker after the Paris event, and they made a lot of noise. They made a lot of noise there with an inaugural event in Paris, France, the first ever major MMA event. And also they uncovered a few stars. I mean, some of the Frenchmen, Fabakary Giatta was a brilliant performance and a great celebration. Yves Londoux, after he'd knocked out Terry Brazier with a knee, his stand on the cage backflip and his dancing. Shall I do it for you now? No, I won't. It was extraordinary. Lucy Berthaud, the first woman to win. What an incredible story. She's a combat sports presenter as well. They got a crowd of 650 into the Accord Arena, the Bercy Arena, very famous arena in the centre of France. I've never heard 650 people make so much noise and be patient during the breaks. So they've uncovered stars. I think with this Bellator featherweight tournament moving on in November and being announced, it's really good. No, it's a great time for the sport. Even though we're locked down, imagine what it's going to be like when the crowds are going to be back. For every sport, for all of us. We're all in lockdown in one form or another. And it's great there is sport. My overriding feeling was, when I was around the events in Milan and Paris, was that there's a joy and an appreciation from the fighters that they're at work at the moment, like we probably have as well.
Yeah, certainly so. It's fantastic to have the sport back. I think there will be a huge appetite, as you say, when we can get back into the arenas. Well, Gareth, look, we really appreciate you after a long night covering this from the UK time-wise. I know you've got paddleboarding ahead for the rest of the day, but we'll let you go. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Pleasure.
Okay, fantastic to speak to Gareth A. Davis. Then be sure to check out the highlights of Bellator 249, including Cyborg's first ever submission victory in mixed martial arts. Sky Sports MMA for that, and the Sky Sports YouTube channel as well for the highlights of the event. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.